I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Batman, one of the most popular and greatest superheroes of all time. Created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, the man known by most as millionaire playboy Bruce Wayne led a secret life as the Batman, the Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight, a vigilante who roams the streets of Gotham City, saving the innocent and putting the fear of God into those who would steal, murder, and commit all sorts of horrible acts to the citizens of Gotham. After he saw his parents murdered in front of him as a boy, Bruce trained his body and mind to peak human perfection with the singular goal of seeking justice for the innocent, and his adventures have remained popular ever since Batman's conception in 1939. After the earth-shattering sales of the Batman comics, it was a given that the character would jump into other forms of media, such as Batman serials, appearances on radio shows, and the Adam West Batman TV show, which pretty much set the norm for the public's view of Batman. It wasn't until Tim Burton's 1989 revolutionary Batman film that things would change, and gave birth to one of the greatest, if not the greatest, cartoon of all time, Batman the Animated Series. This show not only provided mature stories and a distinct look, but it would go on to influence the look of Batman in the public's imagination just as much as Tim Burton's Batman and Adam West's Batman did. And future versions of the Batman franchise would have at least some aspects that could be traced back to the animated series. But am I right about this? Has Batman the Animated Series been responsible for the way Batman is presented today in films and comics and cartoons? Is it really that good? And does it still hold up? Yes. But let us talk about it anyway in this special installment of Gone, But Not Forgotten. Okay, so before we get started, I want to go over some ground rules. First off, I will be focusing on the original Batman animated series that aired from 1992 to 1995. While I do love the new Batman adventures, my goal is just to focus on the show that started it all. Also, the new Batman Adventures series is a video unto itself. Second, there is so much information on this show. And since I have a limited amount of time, I'm gonna miss a few things. So it's not that I don't care, it's that I don't have enough time. No offense meant to you guys. Third, I will be focusing on episodes that I feel don't get enough attention or aren't mentioned at all. There are a million YouTube videos out there that always wind up talking about the same episodes of this show over and over again. Yes, we know that Perchance to Dream, Beware of the Grey Ghost, Heart of Ice, and Almost Got 'Em are amazing, but I think we have talked about them to death, don't you think? I will be honest though, there is one episode that is my personal favorite, which people do talk about quite often, which I am going to feature because I'm only human, guys. So let us begin, shall we? In 1989, Tim Burton's Batman hit the big screen and changed the public's view of Batman forever. In the blink of an eye, the character went from the campy Adam West Batman to the dark Frank Miller Batman for the general non-comic book reader. Because of this, Warner Brothers began to look into developing a Batman cartoon series, something different from the previous Super Friends Batman that had been established in the cartoon world. Enter Bruce Timm and Eric Ramdaski, who jumped at the chance to develop a Batman cartoon. Bruce and Eric had just come off of working on Tiny Toon Adventures, and while Bruce was a lifelong comic book fan, Eric was not. This created a good balance, where we had Tim, the comic book fan that wanted to bring Batman to a new level, more in line with Denny O'Neil and Frank Miller's take on the character, while Ramdaski, a background artist, was more into bringing a gothic film noir look to the show. He wanted it to be so dark that he went against the industry's standard of drawing backgrounds on white paper. Instead, he drew the backgrounds on black paper to create the very dark and intimidating world of Gotham City. If you think about it, a background artist and a storyboard artist who had no experience in producing a show were now handed a character with massive popularity that was going to be put under a microscope. I mean, you had Warner Brothers, which had just come off of creating a massive money machine and wanted to produce projects that would fuel that machine. Then you had DC Comics, who have always been protective of the way Batman would be presented to the public. And worst of all, you had the most anal and judgmental demographic of all, comic book fans. It's insane that this came together as it did. Realistically, it should have been a disaster, but the creators' love for this character led to the greatest Batman cartoon ever made. In a sense, it was the innocence that Timm and Ramdasky had, which protected them from scrutiny. They made choices that just weren't done by cautious producers at the time. They hired people with little to no experience at all, just because they felt they were a good fit for their production. Glenn Murakami is a perfect example. This guy failed a storyboard test, yet they hired him anyway, because they liked his art. And he went on to not only become a storyboard artist, but also work closely with Timm in designing characters for the show. Timm also hired comic book artists like Mike Mignola, who created the look for Mr. Freeze, which wound up becoming synonymous with the character. Then we had fate intervening. Producer Gene McCurdy mentioned to Timm that the show should look like the Superman Fleischer cartoons from the 40s, and that would drastically influence the look of this show. So the team was slowly beginning to come together. Paul Dini and Mitch Brian developed the show, and Alan Burnett came on to produce. And on the morning of September 6, 1992, the first episode of Batman the Animated Series, entitled On Leather Wings, aired on Fox Kids. And animation in the US would change forever. I don't know about you guys, but this was the show that made me look into the actors who were behind the voices. I learned about actors like Tara Strong, Mary Devon, Aaron Kincaid, Diane Pershing, and Jeff Bennett, just to name a few. Then you had the actors who you would never associate with these iconic roles. For example, I was shocked to learn that Richard Mall was the voice of Two-Face. I would never have believed that Bull from Night Court voiced the psychotic villain who was obsessed with the concept of chance. I was also shocked to learn that the original Supergirl, Helen Slater, was Talia al Ghul. And there were some that I should have caught right on to. Ron Perlman as Clayface was so obvious. I can't believe I didn't hear it in the first place. Some of the choices for classic villains, such as David Warner as Ra's al Ghul and Robert Costanzo as Harvey Bullock, were just brilliant. And the show also made me a fan of Batman villains that I had previously disregarded. For example, the Mad Hatter, voiced by Roddy McDowall, who was perfect for this role. McDowall had been known for overacting and had a special talent for monologues. I loved his episode, Mad as a Hatter, because while he was a melodramatic weirdo, he had an aspect that you could relate to, being racked by loneliness and alienated by society. The problem was that he became obsessed with not only controlling the idol of his affection, but also the world around him. Then there was the Riddler, voiced by John Glover. I have been a huge fan of Glover since I saw him on this amazing show that lasted half a season before being canceled by, you guessed it, Fox.
Take a big step back and literally fuck your own face!
It was called Brimstone, and it revolved around a man who was released from hell by the devil so he could hunt down escaped souls. Glover played the role of the devil, and he just blew me away in every scene that he was in. Anywho, he played the Riddler like an arrogant genius. Nowadays, that's pretty routine for characters who have super intelligence. But this was before Batman Forever, where Jim Carrey would also play the Riddler in this same vein, albeit in a more over-the-top way. But I love the smugness in Glover's lines. Before this, I'd always seen the Riddler as a corny second-rate Batman villain. But after his portrayal in this show, I felt the character began to be portrayed as a more serious threat to Batman. It's a shame he didn't appear in more than 3 episodes. Apparently, the writers felt that he was a challenge to write due to the nature of the character. And I can see that, because I suck at riddles. I also have to mention the Clock King, who had an amazing episode called, well, The Clock King. This episode wound up becoming a fan favorite, as it's a perfect example of making a joke character far more fascinating and intimidating. It was an episode that surprisingly reminded me a little bit of The Twilight Zone. I could have easily seen this episode being written by Rod Serling, although it was actually penned by the late great David Wise. This one is a great introductory episode for newbies. Finally, like many of you, I was shocked when the show featured the ventriloquist in an amazing episode called Read My Lips. I never would have thought that a villain who used a puppet to commit crimes would end up becoming one of my favorite Batman villains. Fun fact for you, in this episode the character of Rhino, the brutish thug, was voiced by Earl Bowen, aka the slimy psychiatrist from Terminator 2. Now of course, Kevin Conroy's Batman is the voice that I will always hear whenever I read a Batman comic. He's pretty much cemented as the definitive Batman for many fans, myself included. Funny story, I briefly interviewed Conroy at a press event and kept forgetting my questions because all I could think about as he spoke was, Batman is talking to me. I even made him laugh at one point. Have you ever made Batman laugh? Well, I have, and it is one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me. So finally we come to the creme de la creme, Mark Hamill, the voice of the Joker. Another voice that has been cemented with the character for decades, and will be for many more decades to come. You know, it's funny, pun not intended, that even though we have had many actors portraying the clown prince of crime, Cesar Romero, Jack Nicholson, Heath Ledger, none of them can come close to Mark Hamill. I wish I could delve deep into his portrayal, but then this video would be 3 hours long. However, I will mention that Tim Curry was originally hired for this role, and even recorded a few episodes as the Joker before he was replaced by Hamill due to bronchitis. At least that's Curry's version of the story. Man, I wish I could hear those recordings. It would be fascinating to see Tim Curry's take on this character. But before I move on, I do have to say that Hamill's portrayal of the Joker has been a double-edged sword. Of course I love it, but it feels like other animated Jokers seem to just be variations of Hamill's portrayal. And I kind of wish that we could just have a new take on the character's voice for once. So, who was responsible for such an amazing voice cast? Andrea Romano, who has been a voice director for such shows as Tiny Toons, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, Animaniacs, and my favorite Scooby-Doo show, A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. Romano did something for her recording sessions that I wish other recording directors would do, having her actors record their lines in one room. She is a pure legend, and an essential factor for making Batman the Animated Series the amazing show it was. Also, I want to take a minute to put a spotlight on Avery Coburn, the broadcast standards and practices liaison for Fox during Batman's run. In other words, she was the person who handled the constant fight in the American cartoon industry against the insane restrictions on animation at the time, such as featuring real guns. If you look at older shows like G.I. Joe, they were always shooting laser rifles. But Coburn was able to get things like real guns and violence on the show that would not have flown back then. If it wasn't for Coburn's efforts, Batman would have just likely been another Saturday morning cartoon. Now let's get into the episodes of this show that I love and wish would get some more attention. Let's start off with Joker's Favor. In this episode, Ed Begley Jr. plays Charlie Collins, a man who angrily curses at the Joker on the highway on his way back home from work. When he realizes his mistake, the Joker corners him, and the terrified Charlie agrees to do a favor for the Joker, so he doesn't get murdered. The Joker agrees to this, and 2 years later, he tracks Charlie down to call in this favor. Obviously, things go horribly wrong, and Charlie is able to contact Batman for help. This episode, like many other fan favorites, was written by the amazing Paul Dini, who's gone on to have an amazing career in both comics and TV. This episode is not perfect, as it's got Batman having to avoid poisoned darts and death traps in a museum's replica of an Incan temple. That's pretty stupid. I mean, who would go to that museum? But my favorite moment in this episode is when Charlie tricks the Joker into thinking that he's going to murder him, and I just love this one line.
Look, Charlie, you've had a busy day. All this running around, all this excitement with Batman!
It cracks me up every time, and it's also one of the few times that Batman laughs on the show. Another episode that I don't see many people talk about is Dreams of Darkness, written by legendary writing team Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens. This story involves Batman being exposed to the Scarecrow's fear toxin, and though he can take an antidote, it will knock him out for 2 solid days. So Batman decides to not take it because he needs to stop the Scarecrow from poisoning the city's water supply. Unfortunately, he crashes his car outside of Arkham Asylum and is soon brought in by the staff, who don't believe that he's Batman. There's 2 things that I love about this episode. First off, the structure and narration of the story, where Bruce narrates the story from the end of the episode and works his way backwards. It reminds me of one of my favorite film noir movies, DOA, a movie that relies heavily on narration and a non-linear timeline. The film involves a guy who's telling the story of how he's fatally poisoned by somebody and has to find out who murdered him before he dies. Check that flick out, you will not be disappointed. But the main reason I love this episode is the visuals. Batman's hallucinations are so creepy and show a deep view of the trauma that has made him take up the mantle of Batman. I mean, look at this scene. We see Bruce trying to stop his parents from going down a tunnel, only to have the tunnel turn into the barrel of a gun. Can you believe that? That is insane. God, why don't people talk about this episode that much? It is so good. Funny how they used the same scheme that Scarecrow had in this episode for the plot of Batman Begins. I also can't believe why no one talks about another favorite of mine, A Bullet for Bullock. It's actually an adaptation of Detective Comics number 651, written by Chuck Dixon, with the script written by Frank Parr, who wrote many great episodes of this series. The episode is about how Harvey Bullock needs to figure out who has been trying to kill him, and turns to someone he hates, Batman. It's pretty fun to see the dynamic between Bullock and Batman, 2 characters that hate each other, but learn to respect each other's code. Also, the reveal of the culprit and their motivations is pretty neat. Harley's Holiday is another fun episode. It's very similar to Birds of a Feather, a Penguin episode that gets mentioned a lot. I love that episode, but I love Harley's Holiday even more. It's just silly Harley Quinn fun. This episode involves Harley Quinn being deemed sane by the psychiatrist at Arkham Asylum. She tries to reintegrate into society upon her release, but a misunderstanding causes a series of insane events. This episode gets more crazy as it goes along, and goes to prove how Harley could carry her own story. It's too bad that Arleen Sorkin has retired from acting. No offense to Tara Strong, but Sorkin's delivery as Harley just cannot be replicated. Speaking of delivery, this is my favorite joke of the episode.
I am the master of fear, the lord of despair. Cower before me in witless terror.
Hi, Professor Crane.
Good evening, child. Worship me, fools.
Finally, let's talk about my favorite episode that is on many people's top 10 list, Baby Doll. The plot revolves around a former child star who suffers from a disease that doesn't let her age, leaving her in the body of a toddler for the rest of her life. She goes insane after her career fails and falls into obscurity, so she starts kidnapping her former cast members from the show that brought her fame a decade ago. And in order to recreate the magic of her life before she left that show, she forces her cast members to pretend to be the characters again. What elevates this episode is Alison LaPlaca's performance as Baby Doll. The way she switches between the sane Baby Doll and her insane persona is disturbing, and she delivers one of the saddest lines in the show's history. Now, I have to mention one of the last factors that made this show amazing: the music, and the many people who contributed to it. Danny Elfman created the opening theme for the first season, which is the theme best associated with the series. I wish I could play it for you, but YouTube sucks, so no dice. But the most remembered composers are Shirley Walker, Lolita Ritmanis, and Michael McCuistion. Walker, in particular, won a Daytime Emmy Award for scoring A Bullet for Bullock. I would recommend you go buy the score for yourself, which is available on Amazon. Also, while I was watching these episodes again, I happened to notice that every time they've got a scene in the Batcave, there is no music. Just goes to again prove how great this show truly is. So, should this show come back? Well, take your pick, because it already has. Batman the Animated Series went on to continue in the New Batman Adventures, the Superman Animated Series, Justice League Unlimited, and a show I don't really care for myself, Batman Beyond. The original show also inspired many other Batman animated series, like The Batman and Beware the Batman. I enjoyed those shows, but I just felt they delivered a lot of the same types of stories from Batman the Animated Series. To be quite frank with you, and I know I'm gonna get some hate for this, but my favorite Batman cartoon after the animated series was Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Yeah, I know, I can already see the angry and bewildered comments. I just like that show. It was a new, or rather an old take on Batman. It was a lot of fun, and it made me appreciate the zaniness of the Silver Age Batman comics. Maybe I'll talk about that show another day. Although, if you do want an actual continuation of the Batman animated series universe, there is currently a comic book being published called Batman: The Adventures Continue, which revolves around the Bruce Timm incarnation of the character. But the future will hold more Batman cartoons that frankly sound a lot like what we've already seen before, as Bruce Timm, Matt Reeves, and J.J. Abrams will be collaborating on a new Batman animated series called Batman: Caped Crusader, which will likely arrive on HBO Max after the release of Matt Reeves' new Batman movie next year. If you want to see the classic, you can watch the whole thing on HBO Max at this very moment. So if there's one thing we have learned since Batman the Animated Series hit the airwaves 29 years ago, it's that the Dark Knight will never truly leave our television screens. So pour yourself your favorite drink, play that amazing score, look out into the city skyline, and if you look hard enough, you may just get lucky and catch a glimpse of a cape swinging from a grappling hook. If you do, be sure to nod your head in respect to a legendary series that will live on forever in our hearts.
Meow, oh meow, want your bad romance. Carnival, hammer, oh hammer, ha ha, oh ha ha, want your bad romance. Tired of Joker and his greasy hair. His dumb card tricks could never please me downstairs. I want bad love. Love, 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 I want bad love. His high-pitched voice and his shrieks full of glee. He sounded like he hasn't hit puberty. I want Batman. That's my plan, I'll get Batman. Just because I'm a jester doesn't mean I can't pleasure. I want all my jokes to be on you. Bust out the back cuffs and your grappling hook. You and me could have a bad romance.
I'm Jesse Shade, speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for JoBlo.com, and thank you for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Videos channel. Tell your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We're an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we will see you next time for the next installment of Gone But Not Forgotten.